Who has never heard of the Philistines, the greatest rivals of Israel, who for centuries waged epic battles against heroes like Samson and the young David? These feared warriors were known not only for their strength, but also for their relentless rivalry against the people chosen by God. But have you ever wondered how this conflict began? Where did the Philistines come from? And why did they mysteriously disappear from history? Get ready, because in this video, we will uncover who the Philistines really were, what their beliefs and customs were, and the surprising fate that forever sealed the lives of Israel's greatest enemies. Imagine a distant time, long before the days of David and Solomon, when Israel was still struggling to establish itself as a strong nation. It was an era of constant battles, in which warrior peoples fought over fertile lands and control of strategic regions. Among these adversaries, one stood out as Israel's most feared enemy, the Philistines. But who were they? Where did they come from? And what made them so powerful? To understand their origins, we must look beyond the borders of Canaan, across the sea. That's right, the sea was the path that brought the Philistines to that land. Unlike the Israelites, who lived among mountains and deserts, the Philistines were a people from far away, from lands bathed by the Aegean Sea. They were not born in that region, but arrived by sailing in search of a new home. The Bible describes the Philistines as fierce warriors, constant enemies of Israel. However, historical records shed even more light on their origins. Ancient Egyptian documents mention a group called the Sea Peoples, fearless navigators who crossed the Mediterranean, attacking cities and challenging great armies. Among these peoples, one stood out, the Philistines, whose name closely resembles Philistines. Many scholars believe this group originated in Crete or other nearby Greek islands. The Philistines were not only skilled at sea, but also excellent warriors. Unlike many peoples of that time, they mastered iron metallurgy, which gave them a significant advantage in combat. Armed with stronger swords and spears, they set out across the Mediterranean, plundering and destroying cities in search of a territory to call their own. However, not all of their attacks were successful. When they attempted to invade Egypt, they encountered fierce resistance. The Egyptians, led by Pharaoh Ramesses III, managed to stop them in a grand battle. But instead of exterminating them, the Egyptians allowed the Philistines to settle on the coast of Canaan. Coincidentally, this was the same territory that God had promised to the people of Israel, which marked the beginning of a long history of conflicts between the two peoples. Around the 12th century before Christ, a new and powerful enemy established itself in Canaan, the Philistines. Arriving from the sea, they took lands by force and quickly consolidated their dominance in the region. To secure their presence, they built fortified cities in strategic locations, forming the famous Philistine Pentapolis, a group of 5 great cities that became the heart of their empire. Gaza, located in the south, this city became a center of power, controlling the most important trade routes in the region. Ashdod, situated further north, it was known for the majestic temple dedicated to the god Dagon, the principal deity of the Philistines. Ashkelon, a crucial port city, responsible for much of the Philistines' trade and cultural exchanges. Gath, the homeland of Goliath, the giant warrior, and one of the main military centers of the Philistine people. Ekron, known for its agricultural production and economic influence in the region. Although each city had its own rulers, together they formed a powerful coalition that maintained control over Canaan for many years. But what made the Philistines so feared? The answer lay in their military technology. While the Israelites were still using bronze weapons, the Philistines had already mastered iron metallurgy. This gave them a significant advantage, as their swords, spears, and shields were more durable and effective in battle. Their well-equipped army, combined with their battle experience, made them practically invincible on many occasions. Beyond military strength, Philistine culture also set them apart from the Israelites. While the Hebrew people worshipped a single god and followed strict religious principles, the Philistines worshipped multiple gods, with Dagon being the most important. Their customs and beliefs opposed Israel's values, intensifying conflicts between the two peoples. The arrival of the Philistines on the coast of Canaan marked the beginning of a long rivalry. On one side were organized warriors, with superior weapons and well-protected cities. On the other were the Israelites, a people who relied on divine leadership and lived according to the covenant established on Mount Sinai. At that time, Israel did not yet have a king. The people were led by the judges, men and women chosen by God to protect them and guide them back to faith when they strayed. Among them, one became especially famous for his fight against the Philistines, Samson. His story of supernatural strength and memorable battles left a deep mark on the history of Israel and the eternal struggle against its powerful enemies. Samson was born in difficult times. The Philistines had become lords of the land, imposing their rule over Israel and oppressing the chosen people, but God had already planned a way to bring deliverance. One day, an angel appeared to a barren woman, announcing that she would have a special son. This boy would be a Nazirite, consecrated to God from the womb. As a sign of this calling, he could never cut his hair or drink wine. From an early age, Samson showed that he was no ordinary man. His strength was supernatural. In one of his first impressive feats, he faced a lion with his own hands and tore it apart. Later, he single-handedly defeated 1,000 Philistines, armed only with the jawbone of a donkey. Wherever he went, he spread terror among his enemies, who, despite numerous attempts, could not capture him. However, no matter how physically strong he was, Samson had a weakness. His heart was easily won over by Philistine women. This led him to become involved with Delilah, a cunning woman whom the Philistines bribed to discover the secret of his strength. Using persistence and charm, she finally managed to extract the truth from Samson. His strength came from his Nazirite vow, and if his hair were cut, he would become as weak as any other man. That night, while Samson slept, Delilah treacherously cut his braids. When he woke up, he tried to fight back, but his power had vanished. The Philistines captured him, gouged out his eyes, and took him as a prisoner. To mock him, they organized a great celebration in the temple of Dagon, gathering a large crowd to watch the man who had once terrorized them, now reduced to humiliation. But in the darkest moment of his life, Samson turned to God. With a broken heart, he made his final prayer. He asked the Lord to restore his strength just one more time. God heard his cry. With one final effort, Samson grasped the temple's pillars and pushed them with all his might. The structure collapsed, crushing thousands of Philistines, including their rulers. It was his last act, but also his greatest victory. Even in his death, Samson proved that the God of Israel was the one and only true God, more powerful than any pagan idol. Even with Samson's death, the Philistine threat did not disappear. On the contrary, they continued to dominate the region with well-trained armies and superior weapons. Israel, without a strong leader to guide them, suffered defeat after defeat. In their desperation, the people made a bold decision. They took the Ark of the Covenant to the battlefield, believing that its presence would bring them a miraculous victory. The Ark of the Covenant was the most sacred object in Israel, a symbol of God's presence among the people. Inside it were the tablets of the law, a portion of the manna that had sustained the Israelites in the wilderness, and Aaron's staff, which had miraculously blossomed. When the Ark went before Israel's armies, great feats occurred. But the people forgot something essential. It was not the Ark that guaranteed their victory, but their obedience and covenant with God. Without that, their confidence was empty. The result was disastrous. The Philistines defeated Israel and took the Ark as a prize of war. The shock was immense. How could God allow his most sacred symbol to fall into the hands of a pagan people? To the Philistines, this was proof that their god, Dagon, was superior to the God of Israel. Triumphant, they took the Ark to the temple of Dagon in Ashdod, placing it as a trophy beside the imposing statue of their deity. But something unexpected happened. The next morning, the Philistine priests entered the temple and were astonished. The statue of Dagon had fallen before the Ark, as if prostrated in submission to the true God. Intrigued, they lifted the statue and put it back in its place. However, the next day, an even more powerful sign occurred. Dagon had fallen again, but this time his head and hands had broken off on the ground. There was no way to deny it. This was no coincidence. It was a clear demonstration that the God of Israel remained in control of all things. Even when it seemed that he had been defeated, his sovereignty manifested itself undeniably. As if the humiliation in the temple of Dagon was not enough, an even greater calamity struck the Philistines. A mysterious plague began to spread among them. Wherever the Ark of the Covenant was taken, painful tumors appeared, and the population fell ill in great numbers. What once seemed like a trophy of war now became a terrible burden. The pride of the Philistines gave way to terror. Desperation took hold of the cities. The people no longer saw the Ark as a sign of victory, but as a curse. The Philistine leaders gathered to decide what to do. There was no doubt. The only solution was to return the Ark to Israel. However, there was a problem. What if returning it the wrong way brought even more destruction? To avoid this, they consulted their priests and diviners. The answer was clear. The Ark should be returned with an offering, a kind of tribute, to acknowledge the power of the God of Israel and seek his mercy. Following this advice, the Philistines built a new cart and placed the Ark upon it. As a sign of submission, they also sent 5 figures of tumors and 5 figures of rats made of gold, representing the plagues that had struck their cities. To pull the cart, they chose 2 cows that had never been used for such a task. They set up a decisive test. If the cows went on their own toward Israel, without anyone guiding them, it would prove that everything that had happened was the work of the God of Israel. And then, before the unbelieving eyes of the Philistines, the cows set off without hesitation, following a straight path to the Israelite territory. They did not turn to the right or to the left, as if an invisible force was leading them. This was the ultimate sign. The God of Israel was not like the idols of the Philistines. He was real, sovereign, and infinitely more powerful than any pagan god. The Philistines may have defeated Israel militarily, but spiritually they were humiliated. Their technology, their armies, and their war strategy could not prevent the manifestation of the living God. In the end, they understood an inescapable truth. No kingdom, no matter how strong, could withstand the creator of the universe. The war between the Philistines and the Israelites seemed endless. Despite the humiliating defeats they suffered at the hands of Samson and the disaster of capturing the Ark of the Covenant, the Philistines remained a formidable enemy. With iron weapons, experienced soldiers, and a well-organized army, they dominated the battlefields. Israel, on the other hand, trusted in God, but often found itself at a military disadvantage. It was in this tense scenario that one of the most remarkable episodes in history took place: the confrontation between a giant Philistine warrior and a simple Israelite shepherd. The 2 armies positioned themselves in the valley of Elah, ready for battle. But instead of attacking, the Philistines decided to wait. They had a trump card, a weapon that no Israelite would dare to face: Goliath. Goliath was a monster in the form of a man. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, he wore a bronze armor so heavy that few could even lift it. His gigantic spear looked more like a tree trunk, and his words were as sharp as his blade. His terrifying physical strength was not enough. He was also an experienced warrior, trained to crush any enemy who crossed his path. For 40 days, every morning and every evening, Goliath came down into the valley and issued his challenge. "Choose a man to fight me. If he defeats me, we will be your servants. But if I win, you will be our slaves forever." And as if the challenge were not enough, he insulted the Israelites, mocked their God, and laughed at the cowardice of their soldiers. No man dared to face him. Not even King Saul, the tallest and strongest among the Israelites, had the courage to answer the call. Fear dominated the army of Israel. Meanwhile, far from the battlefield, a young shepherd was tending his family's sheep. His name was David. He was the youngest of 8 brothers and was not a soldier, nor did he possess weapons or military training. But God had already written a great destiny for him. One day, Jesse called his youngest son, David, and gave him a simple mission: to take food to his brothers, who were serving in King Saul's army. The young shepherd obeyed and set off for the battlefield, unaware that that day would change his life forever. When he arrived, David was faced with an outrageous scene. In the valley, a giant Philistine was shouting insults against Israel and challenging its warriors. But instead of facing him, the soldiers were overcome with fear. Hearing Goliath's words, David was indignant and asked, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine to challenge the army of the living God?" To him, the size of the enemy and his shining armor meant nothing. Goliath's true mistake was not his strength or his arrogance, but his defiance against the God of Israel. David's words reached the ears of the soldiers who took him to King Saul. Standing before the monarch, the young man declared without hesitation, "My lord, do not worry, I will fight this Philistine." Saul looked at David and could not hide his surprise. How could a simple shepherd, without a sword, without training and without armor, face the greatest Philistine warrior? But David remained firm. "When I was tending my father's sheep, a lion and a bear attacked the flock. I pursued them, killed them, and rescued the sheep from their claws. The same God who delivered me from the lion and the bear will deliver me from this Philistine." The king, impressed by the young man's courage, allowed him to fight. He tried to equip him with his own armor, but David refused. It was too heavy. He did not need swords or spears. His trust was in God. David descended into the valley of Elah, without armor, without a shield. Only with his sling and 5 smooth stones he gathered from the stream. On the other side, Goliath laughed. To him, this was an insult. "Do you think I am a dog that you come against me with stones?" the giant mocked. But David was not intimidated. He looked directly into Goliath's eyes and responded with determination. "You come against me with sword, spear, and shield, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts. This very day, he will deliver you into my hands." Furious, Goliath charged to attack, but David did not hesitate. With agility, he swung his sling and hurled a stone with all his strength. The stone cut through the air at high speed and struck Goliath squarely on the forehead. The impact was so strong that the giant staggered, lost his balance, and fell to his knees. For a brief moment, silence filled the valley. Then, with a crash, his body collapsed to the ground. The Philistines were paralyzed. The invincible warrior, the one who had terrorized Israel for 40 days, now lay lifeless before a simple shepherd. What had seemed impossible had happened. But David did not stop there. He ran to the giant's body, drew his enormous sword, and without hesitation cut off his head. He lifted it before the enemy army. The victory belonged to Israel. Terror gripped the Philistines. The confidence they once had turned into sheer panic. They turned their backs and fled. But the Israelites, now filled with renewed courage, pursued them and completely defeated them. David's victory was a turning point. Israel realized that it did not need to fear the Philistines when it trusted in God. But the war between the two peoples was still far from over. The Philistines remained a constant threat. King Saul fought countless battles against them, but he was never able to eliminate them completely. His greatest problem was not the enemy armies, but his own disobedience. He distanced himself from God, lost his protection, and little by little suffered the consequences. His final confrontation with the Philistines was disastrous. The army of Israel was massacred, and 3 of Saul's sons, including Jonathan, David's faithful friend, were killed. Gravely wounded and seeing that there was no escape, Saul made a desperate decision. He threw himself onto his own sword and ended his life. When the Philistines found his body, they cut off his head and displayed his armor in the temple of Dagon as a war trophy. To them, this was the ultimate proof that Israel was defeated and that they would remain in control of the region. But the Philistines had no idea what was coming. After Saul's death, David was chosen as king, but he was not like the other leaders Israel had had before. He was a brave warrior, a skilled strategist, and above all, a man after God's own heart. If the Philistines thought they would continue dominating Israel, they were very mistaken. David not only protected his people, but took the war to the enemies. He attacked their cities, destroyed their armies, and reclaimed territories that had been taken. Under his reign, the Philistines lost power and were expelled from many lands. One of the most decisive battles took place when the Philistines, determined to regain their dominance, tried to invade Israel once again. But unlike Saul, who often made decisions without consulting God, David did something different. He sought the Lord's guidance before acting. David asked, "Lord, should I attack the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hands?" And the divine answer was clear. "Go, for I will surely deliver them into your hands." With this certainty, David advanced into battle and defeated the Philistines at Baal-perazim, a place that received this name because there God broke through against the enemies of Israel. The victory was overwhelming, and the Philistines were forced to retreat. But they did not give up. A short time later, they attempted a new attack. However, David did not rely solely on his strength or on the war experience he had gained. He knew that without God, no victory was guaranteed. Once again, he sought the Lord's guidance. This time, God gave him an unexpected strategy. Do not attack from the front. Circle around behind them and wait until you hear the sound of marching at the top of the mulberry trees. That will be the sign that I am going ahead of you to defeat the Philistines. David obeyed, and when he heard the sound of marching in the trees, he knew that God was already at work. Thus he led his army against the enemies and won a crushing victory. From that moment on, the Philistines began to lose power. The era of their dominance was coming to an end. For centuries, the Philistines were Israel's greatest threat. They arrived as foreigners from the sea, built fortified cities, and challenged judges and kings. They tried to subjugate God's people, but little by little their power weakened. The wars against David drained them, and after the reign of Solomon, a new threat emerged on the world stage. In the 8th century before Christ, the feared Assyrian Empire began a wave of conquests in the Middle East. Their war machine was relentless, and the Philistines did not escape. Their cities were invaded, their armies crushed, and a large part of their population was taken as prisoners. This was the first mortal blow against a people who had terrorized Israel for so long. But the ruin of the Philistines was not yet complete. Centuries later, another empire rose to finish what the Assyrians had started. The Babylonians, under the command of the powerful King Nebuchadnezzar, marched against the remaining cities. Gaza, Ashdod, and Ashkelon were devastated, and the Philistines, who were already weakened, practically disappeared as a distinct people. Without their own identity, the few survivors mixed with other nations. Some were taken as slaves, while others assimilated into the culture of their new rulers. What was once a feared warrior people ended up being absorbed by other civilizations, disappearing completely from history as an independent nation. However, the name of the Philistines was not forgotten. Centuries later, it would reappear in an unexpected way. In the year 135 after Christ, the Jews revolted against the rule of the Roman Empire. As retaliation, Emperor Hadrian decided not only to crush the rebellion, but also to erase any connection between the Jews and their land. To do this, he renamed the region of Judea, calling it Palestine, a name inspired by the ancient Philistines. The objective was clear: to erase the Jewish identity from the territory by associating it with a people that had not existed for centuries. Curiously, this name change created a historical misunderstanding that persists to this day. Many people believe that modern Palestinians are descendants of the Philistines, but this is not true. The biblical Philistines were completely assimilated by other peoples and disappeared from history. What is most remarkable is that even to this day, the ancient land of the Philistines remains one of the most disputed territories in the world. Gaza, which was once one of the main Philistine cities, is still the scene of intense conflicts between Israel and groups that claim the region. The war between Israel and the Philistines is in the past, but the struggle for control of that land has never ceased. The territory that once belonged to Philistia has become one of the most sensitive points in the global geopolitical landscape, highlighting its historical and spiritual importance over the centuries. The story of the Philistines is not just a record of the past, it carries valuable lessons about power, pride, and God's purpose. The Philistines repeatedly challenged Israel, mocked the true God, and relied on their own military strength. For a time, they seemed invincible, but in the end they were defeated and disappeared from history. The Philistines had well-trained armies, advanced weapons, and fortified cities. They were feared and dominated much of the region. However, all that strength was not enough before the sovereignty of God. No human strategy can withstand His plan. True victory comes from faithfulness to God. David defeated Goliath not because he had the best sword, but because he trusted in the Lord. Israel, when it obeyed God, was unbeatable, but when it turned away from Him, it suffered defeats. History proves that the greatest weapon a people can have is not iron or bronze, but their faith in the living God. The Philistines disappeared, but the land where they lived remains one of the most contested regions in the world. This shows that the battle for Israel goes far beyond politics. There is a deep spiritual significance behind every conflict. In the end, the Philistines vanished, but Israel remained. God's chosen people faced exiles, persecutions, and wars, yet they were never erased from history. This proves that God's promises are always fulfilled. The Philistines were powerful, but they were not faithful. Their name was recorded in history, but their people disappeared. Israel, despite all adversities, continues to exist because God promised to preserve it. The story of the Philistines is not just an ancient episode, it is a warning for today. No human power can stop God's plans. Now write in the comments if you already knew the story of the Philistines, the great rivals of Israel. Share this teaching with more people. Leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel to follow more content like this. May God bless you.